Judges ready? In the popular animated TV show Brickleberry, we follow the main characters who are park rangers in the National Park of Brickleberry. And they're very dysfunctional, but one main character, whose name is Denzel, is a recreational and habitual pot user. Essentially, he cannot function without marijuana, and the audience always laughs at him as they satirize the use of marijuana. However, marijuana is actually a very serious issue, as we've seen it's been the topic of hot political debate, both in the High Senate, the House, as well as the Supreme Court. As I'm sure we're all aware, the Supreme Court has actually made recreational marijuana use illegal on a nationwide scale. However, as we're also all aware, Colorado, as well as several other states, have legalized marijuana usage. With this in mind, it becomes very important that we ask ourselves today's question: should marijuana use be legalized nationwide? And the answer is absolutely, specifically for three key reasons, which we can remember by the acronym HWE. H, standing for the fact that marijuana legalization would inherently hurt cartels. W, standing for the fact that marijuana use has not been able to be limited by the war on drugs. And finally, E, standing for the economic benefits that the United States stands to gain with marijuana legalization. This is a question that's very important to ask ourselves because marijuana is a drug that has often had a lot of negative perceptions, and perhaps with its legalization, it could affect the everyday American like you and me. The first key reason we need to understand why marijuana should be legalized on a nationwide scale is H, standing for the fact that it would inherently hurt cartels. As the International Business Times finds on February 5th of this year, marijuana is a huge cash crop for cartels. Essentially, because it's illegal in the United States, cartels are growing it in the South and shipping it up north. But because of marijuana legalization, these cartels are seeing competition from northern growers. Even with the slight legalization that we've seen across the country, we've seen that the cartels are hurting. Specifically, the New York Times finds on February 14th of 2016 that cartels who were once able to get over $100 a kilogram are now only able to get $30 a kilogram for marijuana in a 4-year span. So ultimately, we're seeing that the slight legalization that we have seen is very detrimental to cartels, something that's inherently positive for the United States. Furthermore, we can understand that cartels have because of the fact that cartels are using marijuana, because of the fact that cartels are sending marijuana across the border, they're becoming more and more efficient because the technology used to stop them simply isn't efficient enough. And what's more is that this widespread proliferation of the marijuana cartel is really wreaking havoc on American cities. Because of the fact that the illegal marijuana is coming across the border, we're seeing not only regional instability on the border because the United States has to spend more money to prohibit it, but we're also seeing that the United States is hurting. Specifically, we're seeing that the United States is spending over $17.4 billion a year on marijuana prohibition on a state and federal level. So ultimately, due to the fact that marijuana use, if it were legalized, would push the cartels out of business is the first reason why marijuana should be legalized on a nationwide scale. The next key reason we need to understand why marijuana use should be legalized is W, standing for the fact that the war on drugs is a failure. Essentially, the war on drugs is a campaign to eradicate illegal drug use. As Reuters explains on March 3rd of this year, the United States and as well as the Mexican government for decades have used a series of methods to literally weed out marijuana, including paying Mexican farmers to cultivate other crops, as well as periodically destroying marijuana fields. However, this is simply ineffective. What I mean by this is illegal marijuana usage as well as trafficking has not declined at a rate significant enough or a rate comparable to what one would expect with the legalizations. Essentially, the war on drugs is simply a face deal. It's not really doing anything. But because this is the only policy we're seeing in place, marijuana cartels, as stated earlier, are still flourishing, as well as the fact that the Americans are suffering. Because the New York Times finds on February 13th of 2016 that the pot, or marijuana rather, that's being sent across the border is actually dangerous for Americans to use because it's not regulated. Essentially, they argue that if marijuana were to be legalized, it could be allowed to be regulated by the FDA, and that would make it a lot safer for Americans to use. So ultimately, the war on drugs has been a failure, and it's been ineffective to actually do something to stop marijuana usage. Because of that, marijuana usage has been dangerous and proliferated, and because of that, marijuana legalization should occur. The final reason we need to understand why marijuana legalization should occur on a nationwide scale is E, standing for the economic benefits that could ensue with this legalization. As Governor Hickenlooper states, in a report in February of this year, he expects that the government of Colorado will take over $145 million on marijuana taxes in the fiscal year starting in June. So marijuana has been very beneficial for Colorado. Essentially, we've been making a lot of money on it. And this is something that a lot of states are doing too, such as Oregon and California, who have recently legalized their marijuana. What's more important than this, though, is that the cartels are losing the money, and the United States is ultimately gaining money. But as the Wall Street Journal explains on February 13th of 2017, Colorado has been able to invest $40 million into public school construction due to the fact that it was able to issue this marijuana tax. So ultimately, due to the fact that marijuana has had huge economic benefits, we can see that that's why it should be legalized. Furthermore, we need to understand the fact that marijuana usage has actually been, the marijuana legalization has actually been detrimental in the fact that it spread the use of other drugs. Specifically, the American Medical Association finds that the use of marijuana being limited has increased the use of opioids, the drugs that are a lot more dangerous than marijuana. What's more is that the National Review finds on February 24th of 2016 that alcohol is actually more dangerous than marijuana. So essentially, marijuana is not a dangerous drug in the sense of proportionality with how much it's been taxed and its restrictions. So because of this, marijuana restrictions are both hypocritical and dangerous. So ultimately, when we look at the fact that marijuana legalization would have huge economic benefits, that's the final reason why marijuana should be legalized on a nationwide scale. Thus, when we look back and consider the following points, first, the fact that marijuana legalization would inherently hurt cartels. Second, the fact that marijuana has been unable to be restricted well under the war on drugs. And finally, the fact that the economic benefits that we stand to gain becomes ever more apparent that marijuana should be legalized on a nationwide scale. So while Denzel of Brickleberry and many Americans are currently restricted on their marijuana use, it seems that tomorrow they may be able to rejoice. Thank you.